Most people walk through life believing that ignoring someone is a sign of weakness. They grow up hearing that silence means you lost the argument. They are taught that walking away from a fight means you had nothing smart to say. And because of this belief, people have a natural urge to defend themselves the second they feel attacked. They rush to respond. They rush to prove their point. They rush to show the other person that they are not someone to mess with. But here is the truth that most people never stop to consider. This instinct to react is actually one of the biggest psychological traps in all of human interaction. The moment you react emotionally to someone, you hand over the keys to your own mind. You give away control of the situation without even realizing it. Because the person who provoked you was never really interested in finding the truth. They were never looking for a fair debate or a logical conversation. They were looking for one thing only, a reaction. They wanted to see you raise your voice. They wanted to see you get angry. They wanted to hear you stumble over your words as you tried to defend yourself. Anything that proves they successfully got inside your head is a win for them. Most people do not understand that provocation is really just a psychological fishing hook. The words they use are only the bait. The real goal is to pull you into an emotional engagement. And the moment you bite, the entire dynamic of the situation changes forever. You are no longer standing on the outside, observing what is happening. You are now inside the game. You are defending yourself. You are explaining your actions. You are reacting to every little move they make. Meanwhile, the other person is just standing there quietly watching something very important. They are watching to see how easily they can control your emotional state. They are learning exactly which buttons to push next time. This is the real reason why the person who reacts first almost always loses, because a reaction transfers power directly to the other person. It tells them that they have access to your mind. It tells them that their words matter to you. It tells them that they have the ability to disturb your peace. But centuries ago, a man named Niccolomachiavelli observed something very different about human behavior. He spent his life studying power, studying how people rise and fall in social situations. And he understood that real power in social dynamics is rarely about who shouts the loudest. It is rarely about who throws the biggest punch with their words. It is about control. Control of your own attention and control of your own emotions. And sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is not to fight back. It is not to argue. It is to use strategic silence. When you refuse to react to someone, when you stay calm while they try everything to upset you, when you deny them the reaction they were expecting, something very strange begins to happen. The person who tried to provoke you starts losing control of their own emotions. Not because you attacked them, not because you defeated them in a debate, but simply because you refused to play the psychological game they created. Silence does something deeply uncomfortable to the human mind. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of destabilizing people far more than any confrontation ever could. In this video, we are going to break down 7 deep psychological mechanisms that explain why ignoring someone strategically can completely flip the power dynamic in any interaction. You will understand why silence can frustrate manipulators. You will see how it destabilizes people who try to provoke you. And you will learn how it quietly shifts authority back into your hands. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is not the one making the most noise. It is the one who cannot be emotionally pulled into the fight. Before we go any further, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments right now. Silence is power. Let us begin. Number 1. The psychological mirror break. Human beings are constantly searching for signs that they matter inside the minds of other people. Every comment that someone makes carries an invisible expectation behind it. Every insult, every little sarcastic remark, every subtle challenge is really just a test. The test is to see if you will react, and the reaction acts like a mirror. When someone provokes you and you respond with anger, they immediately see proof that their words affected you. When you defend yourself, they see confirmation that their opinion holds weight in your world. When you argue back, they see that they successfully entered your mental space. In other words, Your response reflects their influence right back at them. This is why people who try to provoke you often watch your face more than they listen to your words. They are not just speaking to communicate. They are measuring impact. They are looking for that tiny flicker of irritation in your eyes. They are waiting for your voice to crack just a little bit. But the moment you refuse to react, something unusual happens inside the psychological structure of the interaction. The mirror breaks. Suddenly the person who expected to see their influence reflected back at them sees nothing at all. No anger shows up on your face. No defensive words come out of your mouth. No visible emotional disturbance appears anywhere. Their words just disappear into silence like a rock thrown into a bottomless pit. At first, this silence confuses them. They were expecting friction. They were expecting resistance. They were expecting to feel your energy pushing back against theirs. Instead, they encounter absence, and the human mind is extremely uncomfortable with absence in a place where it expected impact. The brain immediately starts searching for explanations. Did they ignore me on purpose? Did they not even hear what I said? Are they stronger than I thought they were? Did I completely miscalculate this person? Uncertainty begins to replace confidence in their mind. Just a moment earlier, they believed they understood the dynamic between you. They believed they had emotional access to you. They believed they could push your buttons whenever they wanted. But without the mirror of your reaction, their whole sense of control collapses. This is where the psychological fracture starts to form. People rely heavily on feedback to measure how much influence they have over others. A leader looks for signs of attention from their followers. A critic looks for signs of defense from their target. A provocateur looks for signs of irritation from their victim. When none of these signals appear, the brain loses its measurement system. Imagine standing in a large empty room and speaking as loud as you can, but instead of hearing your voice echo back, you hear absolutely nothing. The sound just disappears into the space. At first it feels a little strange, but after a few seconds, it becomes deeply unsettling. That is exactly what psychological silence does to someone who is trying to provoke you. The absence of reaction forces them to confront a possibility they never considered before. The possibility that they might not matter in your mental world at all. And this realization destabilizes many people far more than any confrontation ever could. Confrontation at least acknowledges that they exist. Confrontation tells them that you see them as someone worth fighting with. But silence quietly erases their presence. This is why experienced strategists never rush to respond to every attack or insult that comes their way. They understand that attention itself is a form of currency. Every reaction you give invests energy into the interaction. Every defense you offer confirms that the other person successfully entered your focus. But silence withdraws that investment completely. The provocateur is left speaking into an empty psychological space, and empty space has a powerful effect on human perception. It magnifies doubt. The person starts replaying the moment over and over in their mind. They search for clues about what went wrong. They might try again with stronger words. They might raise their voice even higher. They might become more aggressive in their tone. But none of these attempts restore the mirror they lost. Instead, these attempts start exposing something they wanted to keep hidden. They expose their own need for validation. Meanwhile, you just remain calm. You stay emotionally stable. You keep your psychological distance. This contrast creates an invisible shift in perception for anyone who might be observing the interaction. One person appears composed and completely unmoved by what is happening. The other person appears more and more desperate for some kind of acknowledgement. And that difference quietly alters the power dynamic without a single argument ever being spoken. Machiavelli once said that he who controls himself controls the field of power. True influence often comes not from what you say to people, but from what you refuse to react to. When someone cannot see their influence reflected in you, they start confronting something far more uncomfortable than simple resistance. They confront their own irrelevance, and very few people know how to handle that feeling without losing their composure completely. Now I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I control my reactions. Number 2. Status ambiguity. Every single interaction between two people contains a silent calculation happening beneath the surface. Most individuals never consciously notice this calculation happening, but beneath the words, beneath the tone of voice, beneath all the visible behavior, the human brain is constantly evaluating one single question. Who holds the higher psychological position in this moment? This evaluation happens automatically. It happens in business meetings. It happens in casual conversations between friends. It happens in disagreements between strangers. It happens in simple social exchanges at parties. People are always measuring confidence. They are watching for emotional stability. They are tracking reactions to figure out where everyone stands in the invisible hierarchy of the moment. The strange part is that most people reveal their position without ever realizing they are doing it. When someone insults them and they rush to defend themselves, they unintentionally signal that the other person's opinion carries real weight. When they react with anger, they show that their emotions are easy to influence from the outside. When they start explaining themselves over and over again, they communicate that the accusation has entered their mind deeply enough to require a lengthy correction. These reactions seem completely normal on the surface, but psychologically, they give the other person valuable information. They reveal that the provocation successfully created engagement, and engagement confirms one very important thing. It confirms that the interaction actually matters to you. Once the interaction matters to you, the other person knows they have influence over your emotional focus. They know they can affect how you feel. But something very different happens when you respond with calm indifference or strategic silence. Instead of confirming the hierarchy, you introduce uncertainty into it. The other person cannot easily figure out why you ignored them. Did you stay silent because you felt intimidated by them? Or did you stay silent because the whole interaction was simply beneath your attention? The human mind immediately tries to resolve this question, but the absence of clear signals prevents any easy answer from appearing. This creates what psychologists often describe as status ambiguity. The hierarchy of the interaction becomes unclear, and human beings strongly dislike unclear hierarchies because the brain naturally seeks stability in social structures. When people cannot figure out their position relative to someone else, they start trying to restore clarity. This is exactly why individuals often escalate their behavior when they are ignored. They repeat their criticism, but louder this time. They add stronger language to their insults. They try using humor or sarcasm to get a rise out of you. They might even try to apply public pressure by involving other people. Every single one of these attempts is an unconscious effort to force a reaction. They want a reaction that will finally reveal your true position in the hierarchy. But every failed attempt just deepens the ambiguity even more. The person expected a quick emotional signal. They expected a signal that would confirm their dominance in that moment. Instead, they encounter composure and distance, and that composure quietly changes how the entire interaction feels. Your silence creates a new possibility in their mind, the possibility that you are not avoiding the interaction out of weakness, the possibility that you are simply choosing not to engage with it because it is not worth your time. That possibility starts to affect the way people around you perceive the dynamic as well. Observers rarely analyze social situations in great detail. They rely on what they can see with their own eyes. When they see one person pushing aggressively for a reaction while the other person stays calm and completely unaffected, they instinctively start questioning who actually holds the stronger position. The person who looks desperate for acknowledgement slowly starts losing credibility in the eyes of others. Meanwhile, the silent individual starts looking controlled and emotionally disciplined. None of this requires direct confrontation. None of this requires verbal dominance. It all happens quietly through the manipulation of expectation. Most provocateurs expect predictable reactions from people. They expect anger to show up. They expect defense mechanisms to kick in. They expect arguments to start. When those patterns fail to appear, the structure of the interaction becomes unstable for them. They start trying harder and harder to resolve the uncertainty they are feeling. But each additional attempt just makes their effort more visible to everyone watching. Meanwhile, your position remains completely undefined. and that undefined status becomes its own form of psychological leverage. Machiavelli once said that men judge more by the eyes than by the hands. Everyone can see what is happening on the surface, but very few can truly perceive what is underneath. In other words, perception often matters far more than explanation. When you remain calm while others struggle to provoke you, people interpret that composure as a sign of internal authority. And real authority rarely needs to announce itself loudly. It reveals itself through restraint. Status ambiguity works so well because the human mind instinctively tries to organize people into clear levels of influence. When someone cannot determine your level, they start adjusting their own behavior in an attempt to solve the puzzle. But the more they push, the more their own position starts to drop in the eyes of others. In the end, the individual who remained silent never had to argue for respect. The silence itself forced everyone else to reconsider the hierarchy. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence commands respect. Number 3. The invisible wall. Most people believe that strength appears through confrontation. They assume that real authority means speaking louder than the other person. They think it means arguing harder and proving your point until the other person finally gives up and walks away. In many situations, this instinct feels completely natural because it seems active and decisive. It feels like you are doing something, but confrontation also creates something very predictable. It creates a visible battlefield. The moment you start arguing with someone, both sides clearly understand the structure of the interaction. There are attacks, and there are defenses. There are accusations, and there are counter-arguments. There is pressure, and there is response. Every move you make invites another move from them. The conflict becomes a game with rules that both participants recognize, and once you enter that structure, you are no longer controlling the environment. You are just participating inside it. But strategic silence introduces something completely different into the situation. Instead of giving the other person visible resistance to push against, they encounter something they cannot clearly define. Imagine someone pushing against a heavy door. They expect it to open because doors usually open when you push them. But this time, the door does not move at all, so they push harder. Still nothing happens. They try again with more force, using their shoulder this time. Yet the door remains completely still. Eventually, frustration starts replacing confidence because the expected reaction never arrives. Psychologically, ignoring provocation works in a very similar way. Instead of giving the other person an argument to engage with, you present them with an invisible barrier. They push with criticism. There is no emotional movement from you. They push with sarcasm. Still no reaction shows up on your face. They try embarrassment or social pressure to get to you. Yet the calm silence remains completely unchanged. At first, this absence of engagement feels confusing to the person trying to provoke you. They expected resistance. They expected an exchange of words. But instead they face something they cannot interact with at all. The human brain relies on feedback to navigate social situations. Without feedback, it struggles to understand what is happening in the moment. That is why the invisible wall becomes more and more frustrating the longer it stays in place. The provocateur starts escalating their behavior in an effort to break through the barrier. Their voice might get louder, their language might get sharper, their emotional tone might grow more intense. But every escalation just reveals something very important. It reveals that they are now trying harder than you are. This reversal changes the emotional weight of the whole situation. The person pushing for engagement starts looking unstable and out of control. Meanwhile, the silent individual looks composed and completely grounded. What makes the invisible wall so powerful is that it removes the reward that provocateurs are really looking for. Many people provoke others because the reaction itself is satisfying to them. It gives them confirmation that they successfully affected someone else. It gives them emotional stimulation. It gives them attention. But when their words collide with silence, that reward disappears completely. Instead of excitement, they experience irritation. Instead of satisfaction, they encounter confusion. Over time, the absence of response becomes more uncomfortable than any argument could have been. And this discomfort starts influencing their behavior in ways they never anticipated. Some individuals eventually just abandon the interaction entirely because the invisible wall makes the whole effort feel pointless. Others become visibly frustrated because they cannot force the reaction they expected to get. Either way, the dynamic shifts quietly in your favor. You did not need to raise your voice even once. You did not need to defend yourself at all. The absence of reaction created the barrier that protected your psychological position. Machiavelli once said that the wise man does at once what the fool does. Finally, in many confrontations, the fool reacts immediately, while the strategist observes patiently. Silence often feels passive to people who equate power with aggression. But controlled silence is not passivity at all. It is deliberate restraint. It is the ability to recognize when engagement would only strengthen the other person's position. The invisible wall teaches something important about social influence. Not every challenge deserves your participation. Some situations only gain power when you step inside them. By refusing to engage, you deny the conflict the oxygen it needs to continue burning. The other person may push over and over again, hoping to find an opening in your composure. But if the wall remains firm, their effort eventually exposes itself as nothing more than unnecessary noise. And when people realize they are pushing against something that absolutely refuses to move, they often start exhausting their own emotional energy long before they ever affect yours. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. Calm is my shield. Number 4. Delayed psychological gravity. Most confrontations follow a pattern that feels almost automatic to everyone involved. Someone says something provocative. The other person reacts immediately. Words get exchanged back and forth. Emotions start rising higher and higher, and eventually the interaction reaches some form of closure. It might end with one person walking away in anger. It might end with a temporary agreement to disagree. It might just end because both people get tired of fighting. But the key element in this pattern is speed. The reaction happens very quickly, and that speed allows the mind to resolve the moment almost instantly. Even if the exchange was uncomfortable to go through, the brain files it away as finished business. The situation becomes part of the past and stops demanding attention. This is exactly why many provocateurs expect an immediate response from their target. Quick reactions create quick endings. But silence disrupts this entire psychological structure completely. When you refuse to respond, the natural sequence of provocation and reaction suddenly breaks apart. The interaction does not reach any kind of closure. Instead, it becomes unfinished business, and the human mind struggles deeply with unfinished situations. And psychologists often describe this effect as a mental loop. When something remains unresolved, the brain keeps returning to it over and over again. It searches for meaning. It searches for explanation. Silence creates that loop automatically. The person who expected a reaction suddenly finds themselves carrying an unanswered moment inside their mind. They replay what they said to you. They imagine different possible interpretations of your silence. They start questioning their own assumptions about what happened. Did they ignore me on purpose? Did I completely misjudge how they would react? Should I have said something different to get a response? Each time the mind revisits the situation, the emotional weight of the moment grows slightly heavier. What originally lasted only a few seconds in real time now occupies far more mental space than it ever would have if you had just reacted immediately. This is where delayed psychological gravity begins to take effect. Think about gravity as a force that slowly pulls objects toward a center point. In social interaction, unresolved silence acts in a very similar way. The longer the silence continues, the more attention it attracts inside the other person's mind. The brain naturally tries to finish incomplete experiences. Without closure, the moment lingers, like an unanswered question that keeps popping up. Ironically, the person who tried to provoke you may end up thinking about the situation far more than you ever do. Instead of moving forward with their day, their thoughts keep drifting back to the silence they encountered from you. The longer this delay continues, the more the meaning of your silence starts expanding in their imagination. People often fill unanswered spaces with their own personal interpretations. Some people start assuming you ignored them because you consider them completely insignificant. Others start suspecting that you understood the provocation perfectly, but chose not to engage because you hold a stronger psychological position than they do. Some people even start worrying that their behavior appeared foolish or unnecessary in front of other people who were watching. None of these conclusions require you to say a single word. The silence itself allows their own mind to generate all the interpretations. This is why delayed psychological gravity can quietly reverse the emotional weight of an entire interaction. What began as a quick attempt to provoke you slowly becomes a lingering question inside their thoughts. Instead of controlling the moment, they become trapped, analyzing it over and over. Instead of affecting your emotions, they start wrestling with their own uncertainty. Machiavelli once said that men are driven more by the fear of uncertainty than by the certainty of loss. Uncertainty has a unique influence on human thinking. Clear outcomes, even negative ones, allow the brain to move forward and let go. But unresolved situations create tension that the mind repeatedly tries to resolve. Strategic silence uses that natural tendency without any force or aggression. By refusing to react immediately, you remove the instant resolution that the provocateur was counting on. The interaction stops moving forward in a straight line and starts orbiting inside their thoughts instead. Meanwhile, your own mental energy remains completely untouched because you never entered the emotional exchange at all. Time quietly becomes your ally in this situation. The longer the silence lasts, the heavier the unresolved moment becomes for the other person. Eventually, they may attempt to revisit the situation themselves just to find some closure. They might change their tone with you. They might soften their approach. They might even pretend the original provocation never happened at all. In many cases, the person who tried to provoke you will start seeking acknowledgement from you, simply to relieve the tension created by the unanswered moment. What began as their attempt to control the interaction slowly turns into their attempt to escape it.